Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I am your host, one of your hosts, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, bringing you week 6 of the college football season. It is crazy how fast it is going. We will be covering in full the 12-game main slate on DraftKings. We'll talk a little bit about the 14-game main slate on FanDuel, getting a lot more people into the FanDuel situation there as they open up their slates and have some pretty good contests lately, actually. We will be doing our famous game-by-game breakdown, giving you cores at the end, talking about PrizePicks, any prop betting opportunities or bets in general. And of course, if you didn't know, you should, and now you will. But we are brought to you by the world-famous FTN Network, ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com. Get over there if you're not signed up already, especially with college basketball right around the corner. We got some preview shows there, and there's still a ton of college football action to go. And NFL, we're in the middle of that. NBA preseason started today. MLB is still wrapping up. There is a lot of opportunities to make money with DFS, with season long, and with betting in general. So you don't want to miss out on that. I am going to push through my co-host, partner in crime, Jake Kuchek. We had a interesting week 5. You absolutely rocked it with the Ray Davis call. People are clamoring and calling me up and saying, man, who's this guy going to pick this week? I was like, I don't know. We're going to have to just see. But that was a hell of a call on Ray Davis. Well done, man. How did you do last week? How you feeling about this week? How you been?
Ray Davis had a good week, man. Yeah, that was a heck of a start to the day. I was coaching my daughter's soccer game as that game started, and my daughter's soccer game ended in like early in the second quarter, and I was like, holy cow, Ray Davis did what? So it was pretty good start to the day, and just kind of continue that momentum. Didn't get quite the Xavier Worthy game that I was hoping for. I know that was the big pick. He went 7 for 93 or something like that. So it's not a horrible day, but would have loved to have seen him get in the end zone at least once. Ideally twice. That's what the call was. But had a decent amount of volume, especially with Jatavian Sanders going out, but also didn't quite foresee the Jalen Daniels injury that could have kept that game a little bit more back and forth as opposed to being a little bit one-sided, which it was. But overall, yes, Ray Davis propelled us to a very good day, and help support the team, and hopefully those folks in the Discord and that watch the show picked up on that too. So that was definitely a really good main slate. It was probably the best main slate that I've had thus far. Been kind of more doing well on the Friday and on the 7 p.m. Eastern slates, but did pretty well on main. Didn't have enough Caleb Williams. I will say that I shied away from that, and USC's pass defense made us pay for that. They kept Caleb in the game a little bit longer than I was expecting him to be in the game, but you can't get them all right every single time, but it's very, very good week.
Yeah, I find it so funny because coming into it, all the media's and hyped and everything. USC's defense, they've got NFL caliber talent in that secondary. They're going to be so much better, and it's like, I wasn't buying it. We weren't buying it in week 0, and yeah, they can't stop anyone. You mentioned the Jay Sanders injury, man. It was a bloodbath last week. There were so many injuries. That one affected me the most, but there were several throughout the day that happened, and some very gruesome ones. Brew McCoy, I don't want to show. I clipped it in the Discord, but my God, that was a very gnarly injury. So hopefully we can avoid that and everybody stays healthy this week. Let's get into it right away, and we'll start with the team. Speaking of Jatavian Sanders and Xavier Worthy, maybe a chance to bounce back with that call there and ride with him after the Ray Davis one. You definitely did well, but we're going to start off with the Texas-Oklahoma game, 60.5 over-under on DraftKings. Texas comes in as a -5 favorite, like Oklahoma here, especially with Dylan Gabriel. There might be some opportunities there to take the spread with Oklahoma because I do think it'll be close, and the over is definitely in play here. Break this one down for us.
Yeah, man, this is an exciting rivalry game. Like I'm not a big Texas or OU fan by any means, but this game has always been super meaningful, and always super interesting. Back to the days of like Kyler Murray and Hollywood Brown versus Sam Ehlinger, and even further back than that. It's just been like a very interesting game from just a football fanhood point of view, but also from a DFS point of view. There always seems to be a competitive nature to this game, even if one team, you would think is significantly better than the other. And last year was not a very good example of that. Last year, no Dylan Gabriel. Oklahoma just got smoked. What was it, 49 zip? Is that what it ended up being?
Yeah.
Rough day at the office for the Sooners. I think that is going to stick in their minds, and there's going to be an extremely motivated team. I mean, any college football team is motivated by a rivalry game, but like coming off of the way that one ended up last year, I can only imagine like this date has been circled on Dylan Gabriel's calendar for the entire last year. And this game is like also kind of when it really feels like college football season. Like you're in October now. This is, one of the most historic rivalries that exists. Neutral site game. It's always a good time in terms of, who are on. Love Dylan Gabriel. I just absolutely love the spot. A lot of people have said, Oklahoma hasn't played anybody. Texas really hasn't played anybody in terms of a dynamic passing offense like Oklahoma has. Obviously Alabama is a fantastic team, but I don't think that anyone would confuse Jaden Milroe or whoever it is that they're throwing back out there as a dynamic pocket passer or, a force. Certainly nothing to the pedigree of Dylan Gabriel. And he's got a lot of weapons, man. I mean, I know that the price is getting up there. He's almost 9K. It's a lot to shell out for a guy that we perceive to be in a tough matchup, but I mean, he's just going to be so hyped for this game, and they've been, game planning for this game for so long. I don't see a lot of ways in which Dylan Gabriel doesn't end up with like a minimum of 30 fantasy points, which that is not a slate breaking score by any means, but when that's your floor and it can only go up from there, I think we're in a really good spot. I'm not super interested in the OU backfield. I mean, there's some question as to whether or not Javonte Barnes is even going to play. And if we get clarity that there is no Javonte Barnes, then that makes Marcus Major a little bit interesting at 5,400. He's still probably like 12 to 14 touches, that kind of work, just because so much of the work is going to go to Dylan Gabriel and the passing game. And so I would say, if we get a Javonte Barnes definitively out, my interest in Marcus Major increases slightly, but that's like from, 10% exposure to 25% exposure. It's not like all of a sudden I'm locking Marcus Major in all over. And those are really the only two backs. I know that we've seen Taywe Walker be the guy in previous weeks, but at 5,100, he's not seeing the kind of volume that would support that. That would be reaching be a little bit thin. As far as the passing game goes, it's kind of like a Kentucky situation where we've got three receivers that, are all capable and all can put up, medium to extremely good DFS days on any given day, and Farouk Anthony and Stoops. I don't necessarily see any one of those popping out. I would say if I were to choose between those three, I like taking the middle guy. I think we've talked about that before in like a Tavian Robinson versus Dane Key versus Barry and Brown situation, just taking the middle guy. I also like Andrew Anthony's skill set the best of those three, but the guy I'm actually most interested in though is Nick Anderson, who's just had a massive TD run. He's got 5 touchdowns on 10 receptions, and he's down there at 4,800. Whereas the others are between 58 and 63. And so if you are looking to save a little bit because of how much Dylan Gabriel is going to be costing you. That's a decent spot to look. He's right down at that Jatavian Sanders price level too. So, if JT is back, which we expect him to be, I think in that price range, especially within this game, a lot of people are going to go to Sanders. You probably are going to go to Sanders, and I'm not telling you not to go to Sanders, but there's probably no one that's going to be on Nick Anderson, and he's had a lot of touchdown equity, and especially in a game environment like this, if he gets 60 yards and 2 touchdowns at 4,800, you're looking pretty dang good. So I like all of the receivers. I'm most excited about Anderson, but I definitely want exposure to all of them. Probably the least so to Stoops. I think I don't see Drake Stoops breaking like a 73-yard touchdown and just being, absolutely needed to be owned on the slate. I kind of see the others as having that potential. So on the OU side, that's kind of what I'm looking at. On the Texas side, Ewers showed us his mobility a little bit last week. Didn't have to do a ton, but still kind of did a ton anyway, and has been, pretty consistent as far as, being able to put up 30 plus points a game, get a moderate discount from Dylan Gabriel down to 8,500. If choosing between the two, I'm probably picking Dylan Gabriel because so much more of the offense is going to flow through him, as opposed to, Ewers has a good chance of handing off to Jonathan Brooks a decent amount. And you in the industry were all over Jonathan Brooks, and he had a massive, massive game, in fantastic game script once we found out that Jalen Daniels was out, last week against Kansas. So, Brooks at 6,700 is far too low for the kind of volume and efficiency that he's done so far. I think he'll be pretty popular once again. Can't fault anybody for going back to the well with Brooks. He's just kind of showing week in and week out that he's the guy, and he's able to produce. And it's impossible to replicate what Bijan Robinson did at Texas, but he's coming pretty close to being just as productive of a back, and that's a ridiculous thing to say. And if Bijan Robinson were 6,700 in this game, you'd be 100% Bijan Robinson, right? So it's definitely a guy that you're going to want to have exposure to. As far as the Texas receivers, Worthy has been just like ultra consistent in that 14 to 18 point range. I was on it last week. It feels like maybe I was a week early on the blow up game for Worthy. I don't know that he's going to be my call at the end of the show the way he was last week, but definitely feeling it. The volume was definitely there. He's extremely explosive. Explosive plays tend to happen in this game. And so, just I feel like in game stacks, you definitely want to have exposure to the Worthy. AD Mitchell, though, got even more volume, 10 catches, 141 yards and a touchdown. Again, a lot of that having to do with Jatavian Sanders being injured, and we do expect Jatavian Sanders to be back. And so at 4,900, it's difficult to not lean his way as well. Really, man, I like pretty much every piece of this game. And, I don't like to talk about everybody because that's not what this show is supposed to be, but there's just so much fantasy goodness to go around. The only guy that I really am kind of shying away from is Whittington, just because I don't see that same explosiveness, and I see a lot more volume going to some combination of Worthy, Sanders, and Mitchell in the Texas passing game. So all of that to say, play all of the plays from this game. Everybody's good. I really like all of the passing game in particular from both sides of the ball in this one.
Yeah, this would be like the last 2 weeks. There's been kind of some games, but if this one would have been on there, it would have been like, yeah, automatic game stack, have everyone. But there are 6 games over 60 projected total on this particular slate on DraftKings. So that will keep the ownership somewhat spread out, which makes this an absolutely great GPP full stack, as you mentioned. because there's going to be a lot of points. Dylan Gabriel had that concussion last year, so he didn't play. I think it was Bevel they had at quarterback, and they were even having like major throw passes last year. It was awful. So having Gabriel there in the mix will certainly make things better for Oklahoma. My 2 cents on this one, I agree with everything you said. Andrew Anthony was chalk on that secondary slate last week, and he did like pretty much nothing. He had the 1 catch against Iowa State in a tough environment. I like the idea of going back to him. 6-1's not my favorite price for him, but for GBP purposes, I certainly like the idea of using him. And then on the Texas side, I think I'm probably just going to go back to Brooks. Oklahoma's rush defense is going to look a lot better on paper, but if you look at their opponents, they haven't faced anyone really the quality of Brooks, so I'm not worried about that. 6-7, like you mentioned, is too cheap, so I'm on board there. And I actually really kind of like A.D. Mitchell. I don't feel like a chase, but if you look at snaps, he's playing the most snaps out of everybody. It's pretty close between him and Worthy, so it easily could have been Worthy last week that had that game, and he did have the volume, as you mentioned. But I do like A.D. Mitchell. They're giving him a little bit of carries. They're including him a lot. He's somebody that I think is definitely still in play at 5-4. I like Sanders as well, but I think Brooks is where I'm going for this one. All right, moving on here, we have the highest total on the slate, just barely, between Missouri and LSU, 64.5. LSU comes in at 4-point favorites. Now, I'd be all over Gabriel. I like Ewers. He threw, I think it was 4 touchdowns last year in this game. Certainly great, but at this point, whenever Jaden Daniels is on the slate, I don't know that we can realistically get away from him, or at least in good conscience in our main builds, be like, you know what, I'm not going to play Jaden Daniels. That would feel like if we were a little bit low on Caleb Williams, not because we didn't think he would do well, but we thought maybe he wouldn't have to keep his foot on the gas. They did. I certainly had him in lineups, but I didn't have as much as I probably should have. I don't want to make that same mistake with Jaden Daniels this week. He's 12-4 on FanDuel. Still got to make sure to fit him in there however you can. He's 9K on DraftKings, which was much more reasonable. Later on, we'll talk about Drake May, who's over 9K as well, who's almost just as good of a play, if not even better, arguably. But I think we have to just get Jaden Daniels into our lineup, especially in a game where they're probably going to score 4, 5, 6 touchdowns at minimum. He has 1,700 passing yards, 300 rushing, 19 total scores, 16 passing, 3 rushing. We've seen against this Missouri defense, Will Howard, Seth Hennigan, both eat against them, and those are both good names. But then we saw Nick Vattiato of Middle Tennessee, who started the season off pretty well, but the last 2 slates that Middle Tennessee's been on, he hasn't looked that great. And then last week, our guy, or your guy, I should say, I'm just joking, Kenny Seals actually cooked this Missouri defense and looked like a Heisman candidate. So with all these names that are far less talented, I'd say, at least fantasy-wise, than Jaden Daniels, producing against his Missouri defense, it's pretty much that simple that Jaden Daniels is probably going to erupt. I'm thinking 300-plus passing yards, a few passing touchdowns. He's probably going to rush for 50-plus yards. He's going to score on the ground. He's just way too good not to use. So, again, I don't want to make the same mistake with Caleb Williams and kind of be like, I'm going to lower my ownership and maybe they're going to blow out Missouri. Luckily, we don't have to worry about that. It should be close, at least on paper. Jaden Daniels, easy, lock and load. Logan Diggs has emerged as the primary ball carrier for LSU. He's playing 60% of the snaps. Not very great of a play, mostly a middling play. So I'm not really looking there, but if you wanted to be a little contrarian, say you're running, the 150 lineup thing, and how do I get away from this chalk Jaden Daniels play? Hopefully Logan Diggs scores 3 times, which is possible. That's how you do it with him. But really in our main builds, Daniels, and then we're going up and we're going to pay for these receivers, which they're going to be expensive. Especially on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, we have Neighbors at 6'5", which is definitely not high enough, and then Brian Thomas at 6'1", which is going to lead to him having massive, massive ownership, clearly. You look at it on FanDuel, 10-3 and 10-1, so they're a little bit more pricey there, but definitely going to have to get these guys in. Neighbors leads the team in targets with 53, 40 catches, 625 yards, 5 touchdowns. We're barely a quarter of the way through the season, and he's put up those kind of numbers. Those are numbers that some guys put up 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of their career. Brian Thomas, 40 targets, has made the best of those, 33 catches, 537 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's a touchdown scoring machine. Play Daniels with one of those guys or possibly both if you can fit them. We'll have to go back in our time machine back to 2019. It doesn't feel like that long ago when Burrow and company were there, but in that squad, they had Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Terrace Marshall. And that was 4 years ago. It's crazy to think how old we're getting so fast, but that receiving core was ridiculous. I don't know that Neighbors and Thomas are to those level, but it's starting to feel that way for fantasy purposes. And these guys are basically becoming autoplay. They just don't miss. So Neighbors and Thomas, you can rest assured, will score at least one touchdown each, possibly more. And I would expect both of them to eclipse 100 plus yards. We'll have to see what kind of value emerges as we go through the slate, but I'm definitely looking at Daniels plus one of those guys. I would just rather play Neighbors myself, but Thomas is hard to get away from. They're about the same price, so you just take the best one that you like there. On the Missouri side, Brady Cook, he's been a lot better than people think. 26 plus DK points in 3 straight, has thrown for 1,500 yards, 11 touchdowns. Best of all, no interceptions, which is a marked improvement from last year. Also has rushed for 3 touchdowns. So I don't mind Brady Cook if you're running some sort of game stack. I do think he will have to throw a lot in this game. LSU's been better against the run, so Cook's going to be throwing, and he has an absolute NFL caliber star to throw the ball to. So we'll talk about him in a second. At running back, it's Schrader and Pete. They split. There is PP viability because they're going to catch passes as well. And again, the same thing, like we're going to expect both teams to pass. So playing running backs in this game will be ultra contrarian, but it could definitely work, especially with the amount of volume those guys do get. But then it's Luther Burden, who has been a favorite of ours. We were really high on him last year. Everyone was, one of the highest rated recruits at the receiver spot. Did okay, had a solid year, but he's already just scorching his numbers from last year. 43 catches, 641 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Easily going to go over 1,000 yards. Leads the team in targets with 53. It's going to be a spendy proposition playing all the receivers in this game. Burden sitting there at 6'9". His price has been creeping up, but he's definitely a viable play. If you can get Daniels, one of his receivers, and then Burden on the other side, I feel very, very good about where we sit with the rest of our build. Those guys are not going to let us down. I feel very, very confident in that. When you look at the FanDuel pricing for this group, Burden's 10K. Also, you're not going to be able to fit all those guys in. Luckily, FanDuel just doesn't seem to know how to price the UCF guys, so we will have a way to fit those guys if we want to based off the UCF game. Other option for Missouri, if you want to, again, go a little contrarian, you do have Theo Weiss there as the bona fide WR2, second on the team in targets with 35, 24 catches, 250 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Only other player on the team with double-digit targets is Mookie Cooper, still alive, still kicking, 15. So really it's Luther Burden and Theo Weiss and everybody else, and obviously Neighbors, Thomas, and everybody else on LSU, which they do have guys like Kieran Lacey and other talented pass catchers. It's just that concentration of targets is very, very easy to predict where it's going to go, and we can easily play 3 or 4 guys from this game and know that they're going to get a ton of looks. Now, could it backfire? Absolutely, but it's very, very unlikely that that's going to do so. I'm going to find a way, and I'm hoping that Jake has some value in some of these games for us that we can make it happen. So are you kind of feeling the same there with the LSU game? Has shades of the USC-Colorado game from last week. Do we want to get cute and try to fade here like we did that one, or is it as simple as just stacking this up and moving on?
Man, the LSU pass defense is right there on par with USC's and can't stop anybody, right? So it definitely helps keep the LSU offense in the game, and it's going to help keep Jaden Daniels in the game. It is wild that Jaden Daniels is unfadable at 9K, but I think you're right. Like, this is just such a high scoring game environment. I would like to figure out a way to get both him and Gabriel into a lineup, but you're really going to have to skimp elsewhere to do that. But there's just such high ceilings on both of them. Probably would give a little bit of a lean to Jaden Daniels between the two. Just because they're that rushing upside. But Dylan Gabriel in big games, man, he's been known to break off 60-yard touchdown runs. So it's hard to fully want to commit to either of those at this point.
Yeah, there's legitimately 4 quarterbacks over 8.5 that I would have no issue playing. So it's going to be tough to do so. But yeah, you bring up a good point. And Gabriel will be lower owned, so there's that as well. All right, moving on to the next game here will be Maryland versus Ohio State. A lot of marquee teams on this one. 20-point favorites against the lowly Terrapins, 57 total. I always give you the Ohio State game because you do such a good breaking this team down. What are you doing with them? Because, again, there's going to be spendier options here, and we don't have all this salary that we can just spend on all of them. We have to make some tough decisions here.
Yeah, so thus far, Kyle McCord is not it. We've not seen the the explosive pass plays that, and I think CJ Stroud didn't get enough credit. Like, we're seeing what he's doing in the NFL. He's actually performing extremely well for the situation that he's in the NFL. And like a lot of analysts were just kind of like, oh, well, he's been throwing to Garrett Wilson and Olave and Harrison and Igbuka, and like, how good is CJ Stroud really? Well, now you see what it looks like when it's not CJ Stroud throwing. And Kyle McCord, like, that Notre Dame game, they won in spite of Kyle McCord. And definitely not like on his shoulders, right? So I definitely am not super excited about going there. If he were down in like the low 7s, I might have some interest, just because Maryland is a defense that you can definitely throw on. Especially, I mean, he'll have all day to throw. They've got a massive O-line versus D-line advantage. And yes, I do think that Harrison will get his, like, he's going to play. They're coming off a bye. He was fine in practice. Like, we're going to get Harrison for a full complement of snaps. We're at 8-9. It's hard to get there. We're going to get Igbuka, at what is it, 7 something, 7-4, 7-5, 7-8. So yeah, so they're the two highest priced receivers on the slate in a game that Ohio State is favored by what, like, I'm sure 20 or something, right?
Yeah, 20.
Exactly, 20. Yeah. So it's not where I want to go, but I do see like one of those two having, one long touchdown and getting to like a 6 130 and 1 kind of game. But that's not a slate breaking game by any means, and you're paying for a lot there. You're paying for not just a ceiling, or not just a floor, but a ceiling, paying over 8K, and in Harrison's case closer to 9K. So as much as I think that it is very viable that one of those two will have a good productive fantasy outing, it's just from a point per dollar perspective, I'm not as interested. I am more interested in Travion Henderson. The Maryland game for Ohio State has historically been kind of a let's get the engine moving, let's get everything firing on all cylinders kind of game, where the offense kind of just rolls because of the battle in the trenches that they're likely to win. And because of the underwhelming nature of what we've seen from Kyle McCord, I think there is going to be a little bit of a tendency for Ryan Day to want to pound the rock and rip off 8 yards a carry and get them into positive situations and positive game script early on. And Travion Henderson has game-breaking ability. I think that is not a spot that a lot of people are going to go. It is, kind of similar to the Ray Davis spot in a sense that he's not priced at a discount by any means, but also has, massive explosive upside and hasn't seen a 20-touch game yet this season. And, he might not in this one, but he could also see like 16 to 18 touches, and they're all going to be high efficiency touches. So if you get that, 1 or 2 long runs that gets him over 100 yards and gets him into the end zone on one play, I think there's a lot of possibility for Travion Henderson to be a sub 10% owned play that, ends up with a 25 to 30 point score from the running back slot, which I don't think there's going to be a ton of on this slate in terms of, running backs that just absolutely break the slate. I think this is a very pass heavy kind of slate, at least, from the options that I've gone over, and there's a few guys that I think could have big games, and they're kind of big play dependent, and Travion's one of them. I just think that the volume will kind of lean his way. And then on the Maryland side, it comes down to whether you are a believer, and just to finish up the Ohio State side, also wanted to mention that Cade Stover has been getting a ton of volume in kind of like the short to intermediate passing routes. And part of Kyle McCord not being it is that he'll look to check down quite a bit, and Cade Stover has been there for him as kind of a security blanket option. Hasn't gotten in the end zone yet, but 5 catches, and 7 catches, almost got to 100 yards in 2 of the 3 games that they've played so far. So he's definitely an option to consider in terms of value. He's not going to be a guy that goes for 8, 150 and 2. Like, that's not in Cade Stover's realm of possibilities. But could he get to 100 yards and a touchdown? Yeah, I think he very much could, if all the attention is being diverted to Harrison and Egbuka, and also Kyle McCord is looking his way because he's not looking downfield. On the Maryland side, it's really tough for me to get behind this offense and Baby Tua, who kind of tends to fold in big games against decent defenses. And his line's going to just have no time. Like, they're not going to be able to protect him for plays to develop and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of weapons on this Maryland offense, and when they've been on like Friday slates and whatnot, it's like, oh, who's going to score all the touchdowns from Maryland? And in this one, it's like, well, there's going to be a lot of passing volume, but probably not a lot of efficiency. Maybe one of them, Caden Prather breaks one for like 60 yards or something. But I don't see a lot of upside in this Maryland offense. I don't think they hang particularly well with Ohio State in this one. I think this is a pretty easy win for Ohio State, and it being at 20, I kind of like, the Ohio State side of that one on a 3-score game, and just kind of a lot of Travian Henderson, and then salting it away with Chip Trainum. Not that I'm suggesting that we go to Chip Trainum at 4-2 outside of anything but like a 150 MME type lineup. But I think this is Ohio State runs the ball, has its way, plays good defense, and probably Travian Henderson is the most productive fantasy player in the game.
Couple thoughts on this one. Maryland has been disappointing, and they have been for like 2 years now. Ohio State side, I think it's intriguing to use Harrison or Egbuka because I think people in the past we'd be able to like have a majority of the industry like go there, but now I think people have over playing the last couple of years are smart enough to get away from that, which makes both of them interesting GPP plays. Because I think you're right. Like, Harrison will probably go 6-7 for 150 and a touchdown, maybe 2. But the LSU guys are going to do that for $2K cheaper. So it's just that opportunity cost there, which makes it really difficult. I love the Henderson call. He's a little spendy, but we haven't had that big game from him. And it's interesting that Mayan Williams is just like, his snaps are slowly going away. And you mentioned Chip Trainum. If you didn't, I was going to kind of say like Chip snap. He's out snapping Mayan now as the RB2. He scored in back-to-back games as well. He's kind of intriguing at 4-2 there. They're giving him some tough yardage, short yardage situations. So that might be.
It's kind of if Ohio State gets up like 35-3 by the second quarter, like, we could actually have like a really good Chip Trainum second half, right? And so if you think that's the way it's going to go, which is kind of the way that I think, like, it's definitely viable. The only thing with that is like, then do we start getting back into more Mayan Williams? Because, he's third on the depth chart now, or do we see some Dallin Hayden show up out of nowhere? I don't know that they give like 15 second half carries to Chip Trainum just because they are starting to value him a little bit more. But yeah, who knows? He could get all of that volume in the second half and be super viable against a worn down Maryland defense.
Definitely. All right, moving right along here. Rutgers versus Wisconsin, total of 44, one of the lowest on the slate. There's one other game that's lower. They are 13-point favorites. Now, I have a couple of good friends from the Wisconsin area, and the two that I've really talked to seem to think that this game will go over, actually, and I'm going to try to find the best odds we can on the Wisconsin team total because they feel pretty confident in this one. So we'll see. On the Rutgers side, it's a pretty easy fade, I think. The only two viable guys, if you're really digging down, is Christian Dramel and Jaquay Jackson, the two Rutgers main guys leading the team in targets. But I don't really see a need to go there because we have some cheaper options that are in more appealing situations. On the Wisconsin side, Tanner Mordecai, hasn't gotten to the level that we saw him at SMU. All the promises from the staff and the media of Wisconsin and Beats that this team, they're going to pass a lot more, and they bring in Tanner Mordecai to do that. He is trending in the right direction, but it's not necessarily because of his passing. It's because he's suddenly becoming a rushing touchdown machine. He scored 4 rushing touchdowns in the past 2 games, which has allowed him to score 25 plus DK points in those back-to-back games as well. So I think the passing game will get going. Might it be here? It's definitely possible. We are going to have a spot where we're, maybe freshman season Braylon Allen, bell cow Braylon Allen is back. Chez Mellusi out for the season, which he was the main thorn in the side there. Allen will definitely see 20-plus touches. Favorable spot. Has rushed for over 370 yards, 6 touchdowns. YPC still 7.1. Like, people have been down on Braylon, but he's still doing his thing. Has 16 catches. He's, active in the passing game. So the only thing is he's really expensive, and it's going to be tough for me to get there because I am placing that value on the LSU guys and Luther Burden, and there's some other guys in the some of these other later games that we're going to be talking about that are somewhat spendy. So the 8-4 price tag is just going to be really tough unless we're going to be just punting several spots. And I don't know if I really want to do that this week. So I do love Braylon Allen, though, and I think this is a spot where he probably puts up 30. It's just, again, going to be an opportunity cost. Where can I save a little bit money, and can I, with maybe 20% ownership on Allen, can I beat that 20% with another running back that gets like 22 at $3K cheaper? That's really what I'm going to be trying to look to. But he is in a great spot, and somebody without Mellusi that's going to be rocking it. The Wisconsin receivers, it's still, Chimere Dike, the most productive, 11 catches, 230 yards, and a touchdown. But he's actually somehow 5th on the team in targets, which I actually did not know that for some reason. But when I looked into it, I was like, wow, I was shocked to see that. So there's a couple of other guys in front of him, but he is still the most explosive and the best if you're looking to still go with that Wisconsin passing game. Eventually, it's going to break out. I mean, I keep saying that every Wisconsin slate will be right eventually, but they put too much effort into trying to refine this passing game to not utilize it to a degree. So it might be this game we see it, but I still like getting some of that Mordecai GVP shares just because. But other than that, it's just a luxury game at best. If you can afford Braylon Allen, do so. But I am not placing the priority on him that I am with the LSU guys, which may be the wrong move at the end of the day, but it's going to be tough for me to fit him. So kind of where my head is at there. And if you have a thought on that game, shoot it. Otherwise, we'll move right along.
Yeah, not much on that. Maybe we see a Skylar Bell game. No.
Yeah, he's one of the ones that has more targets than DK somehow. Not by many. All right, Wake Forest versus Clemson, another somewhat marquee game here. Now, Clemson is a 21-point favorite, 52.5 total. Clemson they dogged me out. I had a lot of Garrett Schrader last week. Thought I saw something there with the mobile quarterbacks, and they finally stepped up and looked like the Clemson of old. So not really too sure what to expect from them right now. There is a player that I do like, but this team has me a little confused this year so far. What are you seeing with this Clemson-Wake Forest game?
Yeah, man. So we are starting to see good Cade Klubnik a little bit, as much as it pains me to admit it. Like the efficiency is not really there, but like he's kind of getting there on volume. And they kind of had their way with Syracuse. I thought Syracuse was going to play them quite a bit tougher than they did. So that was disappointing to see because didn't really get that one right. I think we were both in agreement on that Syracuse was going to give them a run for their money. I'm not playing Cade Klubnik at 8K in a game where he's favored by 3 scores. I don't see a ton of upside there. And like we said, there's so many quarterbacks that are going to be involved in back and forth shootouts and have rushing upside. Like there's just not a lot of interest in Klubnik. Also, I feel like this could be more of a Maffa game than a Shipley game. Maybe Shipley, starts out early and, gets like 60 yards and a touchdown in the first half or something. But if they're up by 2 or 3 scores, we might see more Maffa in the second half. And then that, takes away a lot of the upside viability. And it's not like Shipley's priced at 5.5 or anything. He's 6'4". You can get Brooks for 300 more. So it's tough for me, even though I do like Shipley, and this is theoretically like the spot that you want your running back to be in. Like you want them to have favorable game script. I just think that he's a little bit too important to what Clemson does, typically, and too important to their offense, going forward for him to pile up 20 carries in a game that they should win pretty easily. The one guy that is probably the guy that you were going to mention, Tyler Brown, has seen a ton of volume, both against Florida State and then also against Syracuse. I mean, he didn't have like the off the charts fantasy score, got close to 30 points, but he didn't get in the end zone. But 8 catches for 151 yards. That's good for anybody's standards. And the guy's 5'3" against Wake Forest. So I'm pretty excited about Tyler Brown this week. If there is a play from this game, that is the play for me. Other than, using Maffa in kind of an alt build for the same reasons that you might use Chip Trayanum, but you're also not getting as much of a discount on Maffa. He's at 5'3", right? So I think that Tyler Brown is probably the guy that, especially with some injuries in that passing, in that receiver room. We are unsure if Williams is going to be back. And even if he is back, is he going to be at 100%? Yes, Bo Collins has been getting the touchdown equity, but that can't, be the case forever. And then after that, it gets kind of grimy. We've got our showdown special burning stool, but I think that especially with Williams out, Brown has kind of ascended into that alpha role and looks extremely dynamic against even pretty good pass defenses, and Wake is certainly not that. So I think he has an opportunity to run free and hopefully get in the end zone for the first time and put on a pretty big show for Clemson. So I'm all in on Tyler Brown at 5'3".
He's awesome.
I should also talk about the Wake Forest side a little bit. I don't really have a play, but yes, there are guys on the Wake Forest football team that are going to play football on Saturday. I'm not using any of them for DFS purposes.
No, I'm not going to try and tempt Clemson again. I did that with Schrader and it didn't work out, and I don't like the Mitch Griffiths side of things half as much as I like Garrett Schrader, and Griffiths has been okay, but yeah, I don't see it there. But yeah, Brown, man, he's quickly flying up the chart there on targets, and he's been really, really quite good the last couple, and he's somebody that I think might end up being like, the de facto number one here by the time the season's up, and we'll be talking about him heavily next year. So with or without Williams being healthy. Bo Collins, like you mentioned, still, he leads the team in targets, getting the touchdowns, but Brown, man, he just looks like something else. 5'3" is definitely a tempting price on him and something that we can utilize. All right. I don't know if I'm frozen or Jake's frozen. He's certainly frozen on my screen. Let's see. Let's go in here. If anyone's watching live, and I know there's some of you are, can you? Oh, he's starting to move. You're starting to move. There he is.
You're back.
I just never know, because usually it's my connection. I'm like, I don't know. You're frozen, but it might be me. I don't know. You're back.
Yeah, the screen just went dark, and now it's not. So we're good.
All right, cool. We're back in it. All good. All right, let's move right along here. Next game, that kind of threw me off a minute. All right, what am I talking about? The Washington State UCLA game. This should be a fun one. UCLA 3.5-point favorites, total of 60.5. This is another one, man, like another game where I could see semi-stacking this or even full stacking this and feeling pretty good about it. You were really like, I won't pretend to take credit for this at all. You were like super early on Cam Ward immediately last year. I didn't like him because he didn't have any rushing upside, and he had some truly horrific decision-making. But, moving up to a higher level of competition, that takes time. He has completely shut down any and all doubters, including myself early last year. 40-plus fantasy points in 3 of his first 4 games. A bona fide stud. Like, Cam Ward is definitely, even at 8'6", worth being a main team option. If you could fit him next to Jaden Daniels instead of Dylan Gabriel even, I have no problem doing that. I do think UCLA wins this game, but I love Cam Ward at this point. He also has 109 rushing yards and 3 scores this year, which is what I wanted to see from him. That rushing element, he's been awesome. 13 touchdowns, no interceptions, 1,400 passing yards, total freaking stud. Don't care about the running backs for Washington State, so I won't bother with them. Now, Lincoln Victor is doubtful. He was super chalky on that, I believe it was a secondary slate, so somehow a couple weeks ago, somehow cashed even with him. He will likely not play, it sounds like, and the player that went nuts, even though Josh Kelly's been kind of more consistent, was Kyle Williams, formerly of UNLV. Once Victor went down, he caught all 7 of his targets, 174 yards, and a touchdown. And he's actually scored in every single game this season. He just hasn't got the same level of talk, chat, or hype, if you will, that Lincoln Victor has, because Victor's definitely the number 1 alpha favorite receiver for Ward. Williams, I think, has the chance to be relatively popular on DraftKings. His price point is favorable at 5.4, so if you don't quite trust the young kid Tyler Brown, or you like this environment because it's going to be closer, 100 more for Williams definitely makes sense. If he's going to be popular, which I think he has a chance to be, there are other options to look at here. Josh Kelly, who sits there at 6K. Theoretically, he steps into that number 1 role over Victor. He has 28 targets this year, 22 catches, 340 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And then you have Carlos Hernandez as a cheapie, 18 catches for 147 yards on 20 targets. You also have a super deep GPP play in Isaiah Hamilton. If that name sounds familiar, not talking about a UCLA basketball player, but San Jose State transfer. All the way back in 2019 at this point, that was a lifetime ago, he racked up over 700 receiving yards and was the WR1 for the Spartans. So he's kind of buried right now, but without Victor, we might see a little bit of GPP action from Hamilton. Don't be surprised if maybe he catches a touchdown or goes for that famous show 5-catch 5 50-yard performance. He's sitting there at 3.8. 3 catches for 16 yards last time out, but I think he could actually be more involved here, so I like him as well. The UCLA side, I do have a bit of a call here. I don't think I'd be brazen enough to use him in my main lineup, but the true freshman Dante Moore is 6K, which is a very nice price. If UCLA can pull this off, I do think he has a chance to be really, really good. Now, he's a true freshman, and he's part of that group of quarterbacks that's come in this class. There's 3 or 4 of them that we're going to be talking about for years. He obviously looks like a freshman, but he's also showed flashes of brilliance. Now, he had 35 passing attempts a couple weeks ago against Utah, 27 attempts against San Diego State. That happened to be his best game against San Diego State. Completed 17 of those 27 for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, he's been sacked a ton, hasn't been able to run at all, which has made him a little bit more one-dimensional than I think he actually will be. I do think he'll have some rushing upside once he figures things out and they protect him a little bit better. But at 6K, he doesn't have to do a whole hell of a lot, and it's not like the Cougars' defense is going to be getting to him all that often. So I actually really like Moore here as kind of like a GPP super flex special. Give you some of that. Maybe you want to run an Ohio State receiver with the 2 LSU guys, or 4 receivers, 3 from LSU, Missouri, and then Egbuka or perhaps Harrison. The only way you can do that is with a second cheap quarterback, and Dante Moore offers that ability to do so. You do have 2 running backs for UCLA, Carson Steele, Mac Legend, and TJ Harden. Both of them priced about the same. They get roughly the same amount of carries, 36% to 32%. 41 carries for Steele, 36 for Harden. Now, Harden's playing 34% of snaps. He's getting the ball when he's out there, and then Steele is getting 52% of the snaps. So he's playing more, but he's also out there, blocking and getting passing stuff. 272 rushing yards to 264 rushing yards. Both have scored 2 touchdowns. Essentially the same level of production. I do think they have value. I'm not that interested, but they're cheap, and I do think that they'll both probably perform a high floor level. I don't know that they'll be on any GPP winning lineups, but they also won't hurt you. And then as far as receivers go, because Moore's been figuring things out and going through these growing pains, none of the receivers on UCLA have been all that great, but J. Michael Sturdivant is still the WR1, 21 targets, 12 catches, 280 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He is the guy if you're looking for a little bit of a stack here, or you do think like, hey, you know what, that's a compelling argument. Dante Moore, he's going to win this game. Who's going to throw the ball to? Sturdivant. If they do win, then he's probably going to put up one of his 8 for 150 and 2 touchdown type of lines, which he hasn't really showed too often here for UCLA just yet. But we know from last year he has that capability after playing for a very bad bad Cal program. So I love this game quite a bit. This is one where I think the Cougars finally do drop a game. There will be some chalk there with, I think, either Kyle Williams or Josh Kelly, but there's some GPP upside here as well. And I have no issue playing Cam Ward as your QB2 if you decide to go there as well. What do you think, man? Cam Ward, like I said, you were kind of early on him, and now he's finally doing it this season and becoming not a must play, but certainly a higher priority play than he ever was last year.
Yeah, that price is crazy. We were playing him at like 5.5, and we're like, oh, I'm not sure. And now he's up there in the Dylan Gabriel and Quinn Ewers. He's above Kyle McCord. And so yeah, it's good to see him come to fruition, from incarnate word, and now he's here. I don't know that I buy into Dante Moore yet. He was absolutely terrible against Utah, and Utah's a tough defense, and they're on the road, and now he's coming off a bye week and he's at home. I want to buy into it because, man, I'd love the savings, but he just looked discombobulated that whole game. Like, he throw a pick six or something like his first play, and then just never really looked right. You never know, how it's going to go. I think that's relegated to GPP territory only. And also there's a part of me that goes, well, Chip kind of saw what we saw, and he's got like a stable of running backs that he can just, pound Washington State with. And so maybe Dante Moore doesn't have to do a whole heck of a lot, and maybe they try to open up some play action later in the game, but they try to keep Cam Ward off the field and pound the rock. And I think they'll be successful in doing that. And so I just, as interesting as of a play as that is, and the savings are great, I'm not certain I can get there. And Cam Ward missing his best receiver, I don't know that I necessarily want to pay that much for him. If he were, down in the sixes, I'd be all over it, but it's a lot. I definitely think there'll be points in this one, and, probably you want exposure to the Washington State receivers, but I don't feel super comfortable about any other piece of the game as far as any one other running back or receiver.
One other note about Ward is, like, he's had that passing volume, but he's been ridiculously accurate too, like 82%, 77%, 76%, 63%. Silly how good he's been. And yeah, maybe missing Victor, he drops a little bit, but I mean the other receivers that they have are no schmucks, no scrubs, and I honestly think he's gonna have another big game. But yeah, there is an opportunity cost there, and I think we see Ward versus Moore, the classic shootout that it will become. I got to get some more all team shares. Like I said, he's not going to my main, but I don't know. I feel like he's going to have a game here, but we'll see. All right, moving on to the next one. It is going to be Alabama versus Texas A&M, another marquee couple of teams here. Bama coming in as a 1.5 point favorite, 46 total. This one just screams like run away for me, not because of the total, but I haven't been a fan of Bama for DFS purposes at all this year, and Texas A&M, I do like them, but not against Bama too much. So talk me into this one if you have anyone, or if you're feeling the same way, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I want to like pieces from this game. I feel like we're getting a not quite a discount, but a decent price on some of the pieces from A&M. Nia Smith at 5,300, but I'm like so not into that over Tyler Brown, right? Like the game environment just screams like, oh, well, it's going to be 2nd and 8, and then it's going to be 3rd and 5, and clock's going to bleed. I feel like that's just going to happen over and over again in this one. And I don't feel like the production is going to be consolidated enough into any one player. I guess there's an argument to be made for like Jace McClellan might have some success. They pounded him pretty much all season and gotten him a lot of volume, and he's starting to see some passing game involvement. But he's 6'5", It's not like he's at 5K. And so I'm not excited about any one player. I'm definitely not super excited about Jaden Milroe, and as unenthusiastic as I am about that, I'm even less enthusiastic about Max Johnson against Alabama. That's just a recipe for disaster. I think also, I don't know why this is a close game. I think Alabama rolls in this one. Yes, it's at A&M, but I don't think A&M's going to have much of an ability to have a sustainable passing offense with Max Johnson in there, and I think it's going to be Bama just shutting everything down and maybe kicking some field goals at the end of drives, but being able to do most of what they want between the 20s. I would say this is like a 27-10 win for Bama, and that makes things pretty uninteresting from a DFS perspective.
Yeah, I think the game's not going to be too great from the fantasy perspective, like you said, but I still think Max Johnson's better than everyone gives him credit for. He started out really good against Arkansas and kind of, started to let go of it a little bit when the running game started, but 6-2, it's an interesting price. I certainly won't use him, but I don't know. I think they'll be in it. You might be right though. The 1.5 points is pretty lean. They'll probably win by like 10 or something. Evan Stewart's too expensive. Smith, nice discount. Thomas, I don't know if people chased him after, he missed a few games after he was so hot the first part. That was kind of obvious. The running backs for A&M are still, Owens, Daniels, Moss. Moss is separating, but he's still losing enough carries for those guys that he's not that interesting. I'm almost never using Jace McClellan myself. He just doesn't do it for me at all. If there's a week he beats me, that's fine. But I'm ready to move on from that one as well, which is kind of weird because a couple of years ago, it's like every time Alabama's on the slate, we're slamming multiple of their players. But that is the time that we live in right now. All right, Virginia Tech versus Florida State. Florida State comes in 24-point favorites, 53 total. This is the one to me that's like that Texas A&M game. A couple I keep references, it was against Miami, or it was like, it's not going to be that great, and then ended up breaking the slate. Like, I have a real ill feeling about this one, having a lot of non-existent ownership from the industry and absolutely just going bonkers. I hope it doesn't, because I'm not going to have too much of it, but there are pieces here that are certainly interesting. First part for Virginia Tech, Kieran Jones, who did break the slate on that secondary one last week, scoring 5 touchdowns, 3 passing, 2 rushing. At 5.4, if we get that news with Grant Wells, who hasn't really been practicing, very limited, so I'm guessing he'll sit out again. Drone's playing. I mean, he's in play. I know FSU is definitely tough. They've made life difficult for several teams this season, but Drones can definitely pay that 5.4K price tag off. He's more of a alt or GPP play, but I wouldn't write him out and not have any exposure at least. Bashal Tutin has kind of emerged as the lead back. Malachi Thomas is still around, but he's seemingly becoming more of an afterthought as his snaps just evaporate with Tutin's production. I don't necessarily like the idea of using Tutin, but he does get passing volume as well. Just last week, we saw him go over 100 yards, but he's been a consistent pass catcher. I don't mind him, especially with Allie Jennings still out. That has been hurting the Hokies to a degree, but they do have guys like Jalen Lane, Daquan Felton, and Steven Gosnell who are at least decent enough to keep things a little bit close. Or if you do go Drones, he can find those guys enough to at least score some points. On the Florida State side, Jordan Travis, to me, feels a little spendy for this one. The dual threat's always a nice kind of GPP target, large field guy. I think he'll probably be on the lower owned side. He's another, in that range of several other guys that you'd probably rather play. But he's Jordan Travis. He can certainly go off in any matchup, so that's something to consider. This is a really nice matchup for the running backs, and that's why I think Travis could be nice if he decides to be, kind of that mobile quarterback that we know and love. They are giving up over 170 yards per game on the ground. Trey Benson hasn't lived up to the hype, coming into it. It was like, this is the, top 5 breakout running backs. And Trey Benson was on all those lists. I say that every week, but it's just not working. Running game was awful against LSU, but we see that against that team, they're much more susceptible to the pass. So if Benson is going to bounce back, this would be the matchup to do so. If you want to get to him for some GPP action, that's totally fine. And then of course, Keon Coleman, who is a brand favorite. That's our guy. He's an awesome GPP play as well. hard to justify him. He's a little bit on the pricier side there as he gets closer to 7K. There's just too many other options in that range that I gotta play. He doesn't really he moves the needle for sure, but the matchup doesn't necessarily. I like the running aspect a lot more. And then Johnny Wilson, he's also a pretty decent GPP play on a week-to-week basis. But this is just one of those games where I don't want to get too cute by trying to force something here. There's just those spots where I think they're obvious, and we need to just go ahead and eat that chalk and try to beat them with one or two other spots that might be with drones. We'll see how that news shakes out, but I'm not really looking to get too cute anywhere else in this game. But there are plays, as I mentioned. So it's the one that I'm most fearful of being well underweight compared to the rest of the field, and it just going off and winning the GPP for somebody in a stack. So we'll see if that happens. Hopefully not, but as 24-point favorites, I'm hoping for a slog. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
We haven't seen the 40-yard, 3-touchdown performance out of Toafili yet this year. In fact, he's yet to get in the end zone at all. But he consistently gets, I guess he only had 2 carries against Clemson. Consistently getting some carries. And I don't know. He's just, he kind of is that troll guy that you play Benson and then it hasn't happened yet this year, but Toafili falls into the end zone a couple of times, and you're like, why him? So because this is, probably a game that Florida State kind of runs away with, maybe he's like the Chip Trainum play. But at 5,100, it's a little bit narrow to start going to Toafili, even in a complete cake matchup against the ground. And Trey Benson, you'd think if they give him 15 carries in this one, he should put up 100 yards and a touchdown easily. But they've been giving him decent volume, and he hasn't hit 100 yards yet. So either a breakout game or maybe time to move on from Trey Benson. I don't know which way to go on that one. I'm probably not forcing him in, but we'll want to have some exposure.
All right, on to the next one here. We have the SEC battle between Vanderbilt and Florida. Now, the Gators are 18.5-point favorites. It's a 51.5 total. The Gators' defense is awful. This is the matchup that your dude Ray Davis just shredded. We do have that youngster on the Vanderbilt running back side that maybe becomes interesting here. I think Vanderbilt might actually cover as well. That's, the old legendary Kenny Seals around. I don't know. I just don't trust this Florida team right now, but maybe your head's a little bit different than mine with them being big favorites. What do you think?
So the one interesting thing with Cedric, which I think is who you're alluding to, he's seen minimal carries. He's only had 10 carries once so far this season. 7 catches against Missouri last week. And so they're finding ways to get him into the lineup. He's finding, some ability to get touches one way or another. The athleticism is there in a way that it's not with Smith and Gillespie. And so at 4-1 of all the guys that were like, maybe Trainum gets some second half work. Maybe Maffa gets some second half work. Maybe Toafili falls into the end zone. Cedric's actually going to play. Independent of game script, we're going to see him play. And he's going to be involved even if they're down, because they're going to be checking down and throwing to him out of the backfield. And so it feels a little bit like the Dylan Edwards scenario in week 1, where it's he only had 7 carries and didn't really do much, but he also caught 8 passes for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Right. And so I think, given what Ray Davis did last week, if there's a guy to be focused on the Vandy side, I think Cedric Alexander's the guy. I really do. And it's a little precarious to use a running back in, what is thought of as negative game script. That's generally something you're not looking to do. But if he's that involved in the passing game, and catching passes out of the backfield, that significantly increases my interest. And, he is probably a guy I'm likely to gravitate towards, as opposed to, just throwing into some alt builds or MME type entries. in the actual passing game, it's tough to get to like a Will Shepherd or Jaden McGowan. Like, yes, there's a lot of athleticism. Yes, they theoretically should be throwing the ball a lot. It's just that they don't throw the ball particularly well. And if there's a part of Florida's defense that is decent, it is protecting against boundary receivers. And so I think it's probably Cedric Alexander, and that's it in terms of my interest on the Vandy side. On the Florida side, as will always be the case, I'm probably not going to be interested in Graham Mertz. I am a little bit interested in the Florida running game if we get some kind of indication on Trevor Etienne, not being available, and that does not necessarily mean we're going to be on Montreal Johnson. That may be an interesting way to go, but we also might see more Trayon Webb, and at 4-3 in a cake matchup against Vandy. I think that there's room for some explosiveness there, and that's speculative, right? Like we haven't seen anything from Trayon Webb really, outside of blowout garbage time territory. But if he's going to get that Trevor Etienne type of volume in that 1A 1B type role at 4-3 against Vandy, it's pretty interesting, especially if you pair that with Cedric. Now you've got two running back spots that are only taken up a little over 8K. It starts to allow you to do the Jaden Daniels, Dylan Gabriel, Quinn Ewers type things, Cam Ward type things that you're not able to do if you have higher priced running backs. So there are definitely pieces from this game. Because I'm not interested in Mertz, it's hard for me to get to Pearsall. And any of the Florida receivers. I don't think that they're going to need to do a whole heck of a lot. Yes, Pearsall has seen a decent amount of concentration of volume, but he had minimum six catches up until last week against Kentucky. He probably gets closer to the 6 catches, but even if he gets 601, it's kind of like the same thing with Harrison. I mean, yes, he's 7'4" instead of 8'9", but 601 doesn't really do it for me at a 7.4 price point. You need to have a little bit more upside than that, and I just see more upside out of the running game on both sides of this game, frankly.
Yeah, it's an opportunity cost there with 7-4, even though obviously it's a great matchup. And I like the call there on Webb, because I was going to say, even if Etienne doesn't play, I feel like Montreal Johnson just feels trappy to me, especially if he balloons up to like 35, like possibly 40%. Now it's a later game, so that helps because people will be lower on their PMR at that point. Maybe that keeps his rostership down. But other than that McNeese State game, like, he had a receiving touchdown against Tennessee, which kind of, and a rushing touchdown too, but he didn't really do a whole lot other than that. And he was good in the Sun Belt for a year, but I don't know. I don't 5'8" to me, like you'd think that would be a price I'd be all over, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm there, but yeah, Alexander definitely. And looking at the snap counts last week, I didn't see any injury stuff, but Patrick Smith, 14 snaps, Cedric Alexander, 30. And you mentioned he's getting all that receiving work. So a lot of that was just him out there getting, receptions. So that was a big pendulum swing. Might we see that continue? I'm dangerously close to looking at Alexander for my main team at 4-1. Could be the ultimate not work play, but I have one other running back that's in that range that we're going to talk about here shortly. And if you've been paying attention to us over the last few years, you already know who that is. All right, moving on to the next game here, Syracuse versus North Carolina. And North Carolina, 9.5-point favorite. Another game at 60 total. There are plenty on this slate. And this would be one, granted, if we didn't have LSU on the slate and a couple others that we'd be talking about stacking. Like this would be a game on one of those secondary slates where it's like, yep, we're playing May, we're playing Schrader, and we're stacking it up. Now Schrader let me down, and I shouldn't say let us, because the most of the industry was not on. I think he was like 10% at most. But I like the idea of going back to him. Now, I do think his ownership balloons back the other way, even though he didn't play that well, because he's only 7-2, and that's a really good price against a North Carolina team that, if you look at their defensive stats this year, they're going to look better than they actually are because they haven't played that many good opponents yet. So their numbers are going to be way, way worse defensively than they actually are. And they're going to be a lot closer to what they were last year when they were just giving up points in a myriad of ways and just getting completely throttled. But their offense was great, so they could stay in the games, but their defense couldn't hold anyone. Schrader has been really good outside of last week, of course. Over 1,100 passing yards, 340 rushing yards, 14 total touchdowns, which is 8 passing, 6 rushing. I'm still pretty confident and comfortable with Garrett Schrader, but it's going to be tough because where does he fall in that quarterback room for me? This slate, the running backs aren't that great. Like we haven't been back to the 4 running back room in a while, and we're not going back there this week. There's just, I want to play 4 quarterbacks because we have May, we have Daniels, Gabriel, who you touched on, Cam Ward, who I know he's high, but I still like. And then my man Schrader here, who's a reasonable price at 7-2 that should probably be getting a lot more main team talk than I think he will get this week. And I think the reason why maybe his ownership stays a little bit low is because I think that we could see LaQuint Allen see some ownership because of the fact the running back pool is a little watered down this week. And he's a bit underpriced on DraftKings for his production. 360 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns. He's also caught 17 passes for 130 yards as a receiver. He's out there. He's basically the bell cow. The only reason he's not getting even more rushing work is because of the fact that Schrader is such a, mobile quarterback that takes a lot of the work away, but it's not like Jawan Price or any of these other guys are getting enough carries to take him away from Allen. So that 5.8 price tag is really too cheap. And if you look at it, he scored 19 plus DK points in every single game this week. And it's a myriad of opponents, Colgate, Purdue, Army, but 20 against Clemson, and their defense played so well. He did score a receiving touchdown last week, caught 6 passes for 38 yards. So, a little bit like the Cedric Alexander there. And you have a running back here that's going to catch passes, but he's the main guy, and we know he's going to be out there for 50 plus snaps with ease. So I definitely would probably recommend using Allen if you're not going to go Schrader, because I do think he's going to have a big game here and at least put up 20. So there's some safety there at this 5.8 price point. The wide receivers, they don't make me feel all that warm and fuzzy, but you do have Donovan Brown there, 5K on DraftKings, been targeted, was 9 times last week. So it does look like he's emerged as Schrader's number 1 guy. He's probably the best pairing partner if you're looking for one. He's also been targeted 5+ times in every single game this year. Damian Alford, who is, I think most people would identify as the WR1, was targeted 11 times against Army. Did have another 5 targets last week against Clemson. He was completely shut down, only caught 1 of those, but he's going to continue to be heavily involved in this offense. So if you're looking for the Syracuse passing stack, Schrader, Brown, and Alford is really where you want to go with that. On the North Carolina side, as I mentioned, Drake May, for me, he'd probably be just like a lock-in load if Jaden Daniels wasn't on this slate. I think I'd be able to find the way to play May over Gabriel and over Cam Ward, but I can't get him over Jaden Daniels. It's just, there's not happening for me. It's going to be tough because, $9K plus for another quarterback, that's a lot of salary to put in there. And even if you're paying for 5 and 6K receivers, you're going to find real quick 2 9K plus quarterbacks is eating up so much salary. You're going to be finding life difficult if you don't have these, 3, 5, and 4K guys. Now, we do have a couple running backs at the cheap price point, but they could very easily dud out. And if Drake May doesn't put up 35 to 40, and God forbid Jaden Daniels doesn't put up 45 plus, which I'm hoping 40 at minimum, we could be in a lot of trouble. So we got to keep that in mind as well. Drake May is getting a lot of talk as the number 1 quarterback in the upcoming draft. If you look at his individual numbers, they haven't been like that impressive. He was great against Minnesota, 400 plus yards. He does have around 1,200 passing yards this season, 5 touchdowns. Has been picked off 4 times, so there's some decision-making issues there. But he has rushed for about 120 yards, 3 ground scores. He's still a dual threat. He can get it done at any time. And this is a matchup against Syracuse that I think he absolutely could. The Heels have a pretty crowded running back room still, as it was last year, but there are a ton of injuries, and that's allowed Amarian Hampton, along with British Brooks, to kind of seize control of that backfield. And I think that'll be the case here, even as those other guys like Pedway and company start to get healthier. Hampton has been like the primary option, rushed for 234 yards against Appy State a couple of weeks ago. That was a great game. Nobody really talked about it, which was kind of weird. Just a very productive back this year. YPC over 5, 383 yards, 7 touchdowns. I'm probably still not using North Carolina running backs in Maine just yet because I have that bad vision of, hey, I use Hampton. British Brooks scores twice or May scores 3 rushing touchdowns. But he's definitely the guy, if you are using North Carolina running back, that I would use. And then we get to the receivers. If you're in Discord or you're a member of FTN, you already know Tez Walker finally ruled eligible as we get past the quarter mark of the season. The NCAA and North Carolina taking shots at each other all day. The NCAA saying, well, if they didn't withhold this information from us, we would have approved him, which is absolute BS, bullshit, if you will. Don't believe the NCAA anytime they say anything, and North Carolina kind of calling them out, and as they should. So kind of entertaining to follow that today. Now, the only thing is that really kind of doesn't kind of suck. It really does suck is the fact that Tez Walker is probably going to, well, he's likely going to play. And it doesn't suck that he's going to play. Let me phrase that the right way. He's only 3K because DK wasn't expecting him to probably play at all this year. So they just dump those players down to 3K and get them out of the way of their algorithm. So now we have a player like Devontae Walker and Tez Walker, who at 3K is going to become major chalk as we get into tomorrow and we get absolute confirmation that, yes, he's going to play. Now, even if he plays, might he see less snaps? Might he be out of shape? No, he's been on the scout team the entire season. He's been practicing fully, knows the playbook. He's going to get thrown out there and immediately going to be a factor. And even if he only plays like 20 snaps in that first game, he's going to see like 3 to 5 targets. That's almost a guarantee. They're going to want to get him going immediately. So it's going to be tough to get away from. That's not quite a free square yet, but that might be considered the free square tomorrow once we get that de facto, like, yeah, he's going to be in. Here's the new depth chart. He's sitting at the top of it. They might not do that. They might bring him in slowly. We'll see. But at 3K, it's going to be really tough to get away from a kid like Tez because he is really, really good. Last year, 58 catches, over 900 yards, 11 touchdowns for that. Really exciting at one time, not so much these days. Kent State offense. He's been phenomenal in the past, and he will be phenomenal in this North Carolina offense as well. I just wish that it would have been one more week or like, hey, Sunday night into Monday, we're going to get this kid eligible. DraftKings has time. FanDuel has time to adjust his price, and we don't have a 3K guy here that's potentially going to break the slate. So that's where we are with Walker. Now, the rest of the receiver room is good, though. They have Nate McCollum, who's been fantastic, 21 catches, 220 yards, a touchdown on 26 targets. Kobe Paysour, who has been really actually quite productive, 19 catches, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns on his 24 targets. And then the WR3 has been J.J. Jones, 16 catches on his 20 targets, but almost 300 receiving yards, a deep play threat, and somebody that May's been looking to a lot. So there's a lot of different options in this offense. Drake May, if you can get there, and then with Walker at 3K, that's the part that bugs me. There's nothing that could be done about it. We're too close to the slate now. It's not as if like the other, week 2 or whatever, that Brock Bowers was near min price. They pulled the slate back and put it back out and priced him still stupidly low, but we're just too late in the week for them to fix it and try to do anything with that. So likely going to see a heavily owned 3K Walker, and there's really nothing we're going to be able to do about that. Expect a high scoring slate with all these shootouts as well. It's going to be tough if you miss even 1 to 2 spots, like severely miss. I think you're going to be left behind by the masses, so it's going to be tough. And Walker's going to be one of those ones. Probably can't afford to fade in your main builds for single entry, cash, head-to-heads, all that good stuff. So that is the thoughts and opinions for me on the North Carolina side. You can give your Walker take too, but where do you place Drake May on this slate for DraftKings, like compared to the other options, Dylan Gabriel and of course Jaden Daniels?
So had Cade Klubnik not looked like pretty good against Syracuse, I would be like, that's a pretty high price for Drake May. He doesn't really have the receiving talent he's had in years past.
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of going, whoa, this could be like the Drake May, hold on a minute. Caleb Williams he might not be the number one overall pick. Let me show my stuff. Let me show how mobile of a quarterback I am. Let me take over a game.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's he might not have 100,000% chemistry with Devontae Walker yet, but like you said, he's got a number of other options, and his Drake May's number one option is Drake May, and so we're gonna have to consider him too. I mean, like I'm very Dylan Gabriel focused on this slate, and it's hard to avoid Jaden Daniels, but like also, what if it's hard to avoid Drake May? And I mean, it's somebody that I wouldn't go out of my way to force in, but I definitely want to consider him and have exposure to him. So that's a pretty hedgy answer, but it's about where I'm at. Like I'm not locking in like 80% Drake May or anything, but I would say like 35 to 40% is probably appropriate given, his upside in the game environment.
Yeah, I just looked at it. If you play Daniels in May, you get an average of 5.2 for the rest of your spots, which is doable. But man, it's just so tough. And we haven't had a slate. At least I don't think we've had a slate where there's been like legitimately 5 or 6 quarterbacks where I'm him and Han. And if you like told me like you're gonna play these 2 of these 6, like I'd be okay with it because they're I don't know. I feel pretty positive about the quarterbacks on the slate, which is gonna make finalizing them to a main lineup extremely difficult, and I'm super down on the running backs, which is usually not the case for me. All right, moving from that fantasy-friendly environment to an environment that can be in the right situation fantasy-friendly. We're of course talking about Iowa. They are playing Purdue, which is a fantasy-friendly defense, but the total is 39. And also we have I'm not glad that anyone's hurt by any means. But I would have been tempted to get some Cade McNamara shares in GPP against this team at 5.6. But unfortunately, career likely over for him, not because he'll never play again, but collegiately, I don't know that they'll give him another waiver. But ACL done. They'll be turning over to Deacon Hill, the aptly named Deacon Hill at 5.3. I don't know if they'll take advantage of this matchup, but it is fun to ponder anytime Iowa's on the slate. What do you think?
Well, so first of all, I completely disagree about Cade McNamara. I think we're going to have Cade McNamara for like another 5 years.
Yeah. Mental health waiver.
So I mean, I try to find pieces from every game. I try to avoid playing players against like Iowa and Michigan and defenses like that, Georgia. And so it's going to be tough for me to even like as a huge Deion Burks fan. Deion Burks is 5'7". Like, no, I can't go in good conscience pay 5.7 for a receiver against Iowa. It's not viable. Especially with Hudson Card throwing the ball. And so I can't do that. If there's anybody that I like, and also like we might get Caleb Johnson back. So, whatever. And it's not like the Iowa running game did anything or was consolidated to a single back without Caleb Johnson. But now we might have him back too. And so it muddies the waters even further. If there's anybody that is marginally interesting, especially, we're looking for some savings, got to go the tight end route sometimes. Eric All had a pretty decent game, 467 and 1. Yes, it was against Michigan State, but like this is Purdue. And I think that an inexperienced quarterback is going to look at his options in this offense and go, yep, Eric All is where I want to go more often than not. And that's going to be a primary read a lot of the time. So if we can, pump up the volume a little bit and get him closer to 100 yards or get a second touchdown, that is actually viable on this slate. But I don't see anyone else in this game with, main lineup type options or probabilities, unless I'm wildly missing something. But I'm pretty sure I'm good with just Eric All.
Yeah, I like the all call because he's definitely going to be a guy that I think Hill leans on. He's experienced. He'll be able to get room against this Purdue secondary. I think people are going to definitely just cross this game off. So you get there and you're liking the rest of your pay ups and you have that 4-2 price left and you need a guy. I have no issue with that. The Iowa running back situation is just awful. I don't just never will touch that again this season. I can't do that. I do like Tyrone. It's worth mentioning that Tyrone Tracy has worked himself into a split backfield and possibly even taking over for Maccabee after 21 carries. Granted, that was against Illinois last week, and he still has receiving upside too as a wide receiver turned running back, but he's an explosive playmaker. 5'3", it's a little tough to get there this week. I wish it would have been like 4-5 or something like that, but Tracy's one to watch or have kind of, locked and loaded for another slate here coming up. Just want to mention that. All right, we will move to the final game on the DraftKings slate, and then I'll give a little bit of FanDuel takes, and we'll get our core. But the UCF versus Kansas game now it comes with the highest total on the DraftKings slate at 64, just a half point. Actually, I guess it's the second highest. It's a half point lower than LSU. My mistake. USF 1.5 point favorites. That was as of a couple hours ago. That may change with the word that Kansas is going to run Jason Bean at quarterback again, which isn't necessarily a horrible thing. He's proven himself to be viable, but Jalen Daniels still dealing with that back issue. Could potentially play. It seems unlikely. They've listed him as a game time decision, but Bean is starting. It makes it hard to really want to use either of the Bean in your main lineup, even though he's only 6'7" there on DraftKings. Certainly a GPP viable play because of that. And I think there will be points scored. Obviously, Vegas thinks so as well. And UCF's defense has proven to be relatively fantasy friendly. So I don't mind that play. The Kansas wide receivers are also cheap in this game. I want to mention that, but they're all kind of just GPP pairing partners for Bean. None of them are main looks for me. It's really just like, hey, can we go back to Devin Neal? He's cooled off the last 2 weeks. Might this be a strategic move where the rest of the industry is like, oh man, this guy's starting to fizzle out a little bit. Let's just go to Brooks of Texas and skip out on him? Or are people going to be kind of intelligent enough to know that, hey, this UCF defense, it's not very good. Devin Neal should get back on track. He got game scripted out last week. That was really all that happened. Against UCF, he should get 15 plus carries, maybe even 20 touches. I like his ability to bounce back and have a Devin Neal game. 6'3", with the way pricing is right now, that's a little on the higher side for where the running backs are. He should be priced up at like 7.5, 8K at this point. But he still had 45 yards last week on just the 8 carries. So he's still operating at a high level, and his YPC is almost 7. So even though he didn't get very much work last week, he still was producing with the work he did get. So it's not as if Devin Neal's just been awful. And against BYU, he still rushed for 91 yards, which was on 17 carries. Anything over 5 YPC in my book is productive enough. So I'm looking at Devin Neal here as a primary option. The only problem is if I go with that Drake May Daniels pairing, I may not be able to get to Neal, and he's not going to be a priority play, but he's definitely, in the scopes for me and one of the top 3 or 4 running backs on this slate for me. The UCF side, if with Plumlee still ailing, I think we see one more week at least of Timmy McClain, who has actually been pretty solid. Accuracy hasn't been there, but he's getting decent enough volume, and he's finding these receivers. The UCF receivers habitually slept on, especially on FanDuel, where they remain under 7K. I'm not sure why they refuse to price them up, but we're going to get a lot of them on FanDuel. McClain, since week 3, has thrown for 7 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, and he's just, I don't say masterful control, but he's just doing enough to continue to be productive. So at 7-7 against Kansas, where there's going to be points scored, I definitely like him. He does have rushing upside. He might not have shown it to an elite level yet, but he can definitely score rushing touchdowns, rack up some yardage there. He's a fine play. There's no real room to use him on this slate for your main build, but he's certainly a GPP look. The running back side, actually, let's skip the running backs for now. The wide receivers for UCF, they're all relatively cheap on DraftKings as well, under 6K. You have Townsend at 5'1", Baker at 5'4", and Hudson at 5'6". I'm a fan of any of those guys. Hudson tied for the team lead with 29 targets, 22 catches, almost 500 yards, 2 touchdowns. Baker, 17 catches, 332 yards, 2 touchdowns on 29 targets. And then Townsend, 14 catches, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns on 22 targets. So these guys all have good rapport with McClain, and arguably they're playing better with McClain than they do JRP, which I know might be blasphemous to say, but they're all just keying in at a high level. And I have no issue using any of those guys in the main lineup. They're in that range, that mid 5K range where, we talked about it with the Clemson kid there, Brown, right around that price. Maybe he's a slightly better play, but because he doesn't have as much competition, but there's going to be a lot of points here. And I feel comfortable with Hudson or Baker. Townsend, not so much, more of a GPP look, but either of those guys, if you land there, don't start there, but if you land there, you're okay. All right, now the running back situation for UCF. RJ Harvey, still the lead back, playing 57% of the snaps, 38% of the carries, churned out almost 400 yards, 5 touchdowns. He's also catching a pretty decent amount, 172 yards out of the backfield, 2 touchdowns on 8 catches. So he's making things happen there. But I couldn't live with myself if we ended the show before I talked about legendary brand favorite from years ago, Johnny Richardson, who is seemingly like Q. If we had a producer on the show and not self-produced, it'd be able to like cue the Undertaker coming up from the coffin, back from the dead. Like that's what's happening with our guy, Johnny Richardson. And his efficiency has been just stupid. He has runs of 79, 48, 31, and 43 this season. Last week, he busted that 79-yard touchdown against Baylor. That brought me out of my seat. I was watching that on stream because I love me some Johnny Richardson. I watched the UCF. That was awesome. Damn near 80-yard touchdown. I was like, holy crap. Now, he has almost 400 yards on 45 carries. So he has more yardage than Harvey, obviously way less touches, and a YPC of 8.8. You like to say that, hey, that can't continue, but we've got 5-6 games of him just busting 30-plus yard runs with ease. Just 5 catches for 20 yards, so he hasn't really been able to do much there, although in the past he has shown himself to be a pretty viable and electric pass catcher too. But I don't know how UCF can keep him off the field. And he is playing 31% of the snaps, obviously far less than Harvey, 23% of the carries, which isn't like far less there. Harvey's getting about 38%, so that's not as big a differentiation there. But when Richardson's on the field, they're getting him the ball, and he's doing stuff with it. So this is going to be a play that very obviously gets me in trouble with the way I've been running. Like week 0 was awesome for me personally. The week 1 was also pretty decent, but I've admittedly had some struggles on some of my calls. And this is probably one that's going to get me in trouble because he's not even that cheap, right? Like he's not 3.3 or 3.5. He's almost 5K. So it's not like we're getting a huge discount here, but my God, this is such an amazing like spot to target Richardson where nobody's going to use him. Nobody's really going to be on UCF at all based off of what I've seen. This matchup against Kansas is tasty. We just saw Brooks, not saying Richardson is Brooks, but we just saw him just decimate this matchup, terrorize this Kansas defense. Might it be Harvey that does it? Probably, but Richardson's going to bust a play of like 50 or 60 yards and score a touchdown. And at 4.8, if he can score a touchdown and get anywhere over 50 yards, that play could absolutely pan out. And I just don't know that we're going to have the luxury to pay up at running back this week. Yes, I want to get Brooks in there. Yes, I want to get Braylon Allen. Yes, I want to get Devin Neal, but I'm not prioritizing those guys. And I may be left with some of these bottom tier value plays like Cedric Alexander, who's fine, or my man Johnny Richardson, who I'm obviously very excited about. But that play comes with a big caution. I will warn anyone against probably using him in your main lineup. But it's hard to deny the efficiency that he's showing, and clearly the coaching staff is leaning on him. And with Timmy Mack back there, they are giving these running backs a little bit more work. Might Richardson bust a big play? I say yes, but we'll see. We'll see if I can end my little cold streak after Colston Loveland blanked us last week. But that's the play that I was saving for the end here with a lot of excitement, and was hoping that might get you a little bit pumped up too, Jake. But you're probably well past using Richardson in any sense at this point, I'm sure.
No, I love it, man. So just to recap, we've got Cedric Alexander at 4.1. We've got Chip Trainham at 4.1 or 4.2, somewhere in there. Got the backup from Florida at 4.1, and now we got John Richardson at 4.8. What are you talking about? You can't find running back value on this slate. There's all kinds of running back value. We got this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and they don't, and at those prices, man, like if they can just get us a touchdown or the receiving work there for Alexander, I think it could work. I really do. And it's funny because normally, like the last few seasons, it's just been like we're paying up at running back and we're crushing everybody. But this slate, man, it doesn't look like the slate to pay up at running back. And Braylon Allen will probably crush us, but I don't know that many people are going to be able to get to him, so I don't feel quite as bad about it. But yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. All right, now let me just go to FanDuel real quick. They have a couple of additional games there. The Colorado ASU game is the one I really wanted to talk about. I will have on the main slate right up a more in-depth FanDuel right up there. But looking at it, your guy Cam Scatterbo at 8-6, definitely in play against this Colorado team. Pretty much anyone in Colorado games. I do want to mention the Omarion Miller kid at 6'5 there. I don't know if that's a blip there after exploding for 200 receiving yards, but ASU, their pass defense is even worse than USC, quite possibly the worst defense in all of the conference, all of college football. So Colorado should be able to do some major damage here, and Omarion Miller might be worth chasing a little bit there. But I do like the tight end Michael Harrison as well for his touchdown equity. I think any of those guys on Colorado obviously in play against ASU. And then you also have a fun one, Ole Miss versus Arkansas. Now, Arkansas's defense is not good. Quinshon Judkins showed that he could be back to terrorizing opposing defenses. He's 9K on FanDuel. He's somebody that I'm prioritizing over there and going back to our guy Judkins because he is absolutely devastating when he's getting catches and touches and carries and all this good stuff. And Arkansas they don't look right. Something does not look right about that team. I think he terrorizes them. All right, let's move on. We're making good time here. Let's get to core and then we'll move on. Hopefully, PrizePicks site was down for me earlier. I'll see if it's back up. But what are you looking at for a core? Because this is a fairly dynamic slate overall.
So I'm gonna go Dylan Gabriel, Cedric Alexander, and Luther Burden, and I'll leave you to decide if you want to core Devontae Walker or not.
Yeah, that's my price pick. Yeah, that's a good one. I like the Gabriel call and the Alexander. That's nice, and I'm all over Burden with you. I'll be again chalky for a second straight week with Jaden Daniels. I just can't get away from him. I think with you going Burden there, yes. One of Neighbors or Thomas, the price is so minuscule. I will say Neighbors, but Thomas with his touchdown equity, that's perfectly fine there. You may need to save that $400, and if you do, that's perfectly fine. But one of those guys, I know that's a bit of a cop-out. And then the running back core for me, I don't have a running back where I'm like super jazzed about per se. I will say right now, not factoring in what my actual lineup is going to look like just yet, but just overall play, top running back that I'm going to go to war with, I would take Devin Neal. I think he bounces back in a big way, and I will be looking to somehow get him into my lineup if I can. I'm not sure that I can, but I do think Devin Neal is one of the best plays at the position this week. All right, let's move along here. I'm going to have to rely on you for PrizePicks because for some reason I can't get the board to pull up. I will go ahead and go into the betting prop stuff while you give us some of your PrizePicks options.
Cool. Yeah, so obviously not going to come as a surprise. I'm pretty interested in Dylan Gabriel. His passing yardage is at 270.5. Think he goes over 3 pretty easily in this one. Definitely going to have to be, competitive and throwing all day because I like Dylan Gabriel throwing over 270.5. He has, all 3 of his receivers, they have their props at 50 plus. I'm going to roll with Andrew Anthony over 60.5. And then on the reception side of things, they don't have. I was hoping they would have a Drake Stoops receptions prop, but they actually do not. It doesn't look like they have any of the Oklahoma receivers reception props. So look for those. If those come up, take the overs on those. Probably going to be like 4.5 for Drake Stoops, and I definitely want the over on that. I also very much am in on Travion Henderson over 78.5 rushing yards. That's if I weren't coring Cedric, I would be coring Travion Henderson. Feel very good about Ohio State leaning on him to to a degree that they maybe haven't quite yet so far this year. And then let's go to the fantasy score, because we do like that. Good bit. We'll go with Kyle Williams over 14. So I feel like we can get to six catches for 80 yards or something like that. And then if he gets in the end zone, it gets a lot easier from there. But yeah, I like Kyle Williams stepping up with the main targeted Lincoln Victor out, like we talked about. So Kyle Williams over 14 fantasy points.
Love it. All right. So I'll have to pass on the PrizePicks. Looking at the DK prop board, there are a couple. Well, there's more than a couple, but the ones I want to feature here, starting with the running backs, let me get it pulled back up here. Looking at Devin Neal bounce back over 86.5 rushing yards. You can get that at -115. Feel pretty good about him. Like I said, just having a massive, massive game where he kind of, reminds people just how good he can be and takes advantage of this matchup fully. I don't know how I get away from this one too. Rasheen Ali's 79.5 rushing yards. I know it's against North Carolina State, but their pass defense is, and we got our resident NC State boy in the chat there. Their pass defense has been pretty good, but Rasheen Ali's volume, like he's just a lock for 100 yards every week. So over 79.5 rushing yards there too, feels a little bit too soft for me. And then the anytime touchdown score, we're buying all the way in here. Johnny Richardson, we're not getting very good odds, +120, but that's decent enough that we can ride it. But the anytime touchdown score for Johnny Richardson, our guy, is going to come through for us. And then just got to ride these LSU receivers. And, they gave us Burden at 107.5, so I won't touch that. But on the LSU side, Neighbors at 98.5 receiving yards. I'm clearly going to take the over there. I think he has 100+ pretty easily. And Brian Thomas over 83.5 receiving yards. I also think he hits 100+ without any difficulty whatsoever. So that's the props that I'm looking at there this week on DraftKings. We'll have a prop betting article released tomorrow as well on the FTN Bet site that will be available to our members with lots of other good stuff in there as well. All right, that'll wrap it up. We got to get to the part where Jake gives us the play out. Man, I'm wondering if it's gonna be Cedric. I'm almost getting too excited here, but give us the play to end the show and what the stat line will be.
We're gonna let Cedric build it up a little bit and hopefully get more guaranteed touches. But we are gonna go pretty outlandish on Dylan Gabriel. We're gonna go 350 and 6 touchdowns, one of which will be rushing.
Ooh, okay, nice, love it. Appreciate it, and with how good you ran last week, I feel good. I might have to get me some more Gabriel than I originally planned on. Appreciate everybody who tuned in live. Very good show. We got it under 2 hours again. Our efficiency as we get into the season is starting to kick up as well. Don't forget to tune in Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock. That is the Q&A show for me. I will be there answering any this or that questions, highlighting cores, talking about any thought changes, any news relevant, injury stuff that has come up. There will also be a plethora of articles out tomorrow from the Friday main slate that we have, the little 2-gamer, the Saturday main slate, and also the prop betting article. And then Saturday in the afternoon, you will see that night slate breakdown as well. Lots of stuff happening. And then for the rest of the season, we're going to have, games on Wednesday, games on Thursday. There'll be games on Tuesday sometimes. There's just going to be college football every single day, except for obviously, Sunday, Monday, and there'll be NFL on those days. So really, there's not going to be any not football days for quite a while the next few months, which is a good thing. Thanks to Jake. Thanks to everybody else. We'll see you guys next week. Same time, same place. Best of luck this week.